Imagine you are a German scout in the summer of 1944. The sun is high over the French countryside, and the air is thick with the scent of lavender and damp earth. You're peering through binoculars from a concealed ridge, scanning the valley below. There, emerging from the tree line, you see it, the 2nd Armored Division. You count hundreds of Sherman tanks. You hear the rhythmic metallic clank of treads hitting the mud and the deep guttural thrum of massive engines idling. You can even smell the faint, acrid tang of diesel exhaust drifting on the breeze. Over your headset, the airwaves are frantic with the chatter of thousands of Americans, orders being barked, logistics being coordinated, the sounds of a massive war machine preparing to strike. You follow protocol. You report back to high command with trembling hands. In response, the Wehrmacht moves an entire panzer division to intercept the threat. But when the German steel arrives to meet the American force, there is nothing but wind, grass, and a haunting silence. The 2nd Armored wasn't there. In fact, for the purposes of that mission, it didn't even exist. It was a masterpiece of theater played out on a canvas of blood and soil. Welcome back to The Lost Dispatch. Today, we are uncovering the story of the most unusual unit in military history. These men didn't carry heavy artillery or high-caliber machine guns. Instead, they carried paintbrushes, record players, and high-pressure air pumps. This was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit that would go down in history as the Ghost Army. After the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States Army realized that winning a global war would require more than just industrial muscle and raw numbers. It would require tactical deception on a scale never before imagined. To build this unit, the Army didn't look for the strongest infantrymen or the most decorated marksmen. Instead, they scoured the elite art schools of New York and Philadelphia. They recruited the dreamers, architects, set designers, painters, and even a young future fashion icon named Bill Blass. Their mission was as simple as it was terrifying: to be the bait. They were a mere 1,100 men tasked with pretending to be a force of 30,000. Their job was to invite the full wrath of the German army onto themselves so that the real Allied troops could strike where the enemy least expected. To pull off a lie of this magnitude, the Ghost Army relied on what they called the 3 pillars of deception: visual, sonic, and radio illusions. Let's start with the visual show. This was the most striking element of their arsenal. The unit was equipped with a fleet of sophisticated inflatable decoys. Using air compressors, these artists could inflate a battalion of Sherman tanks, trucks, and aircraft in less than 20 minutes. From a distance of a few hundred yards, or from the cockpit of a high-flying Luftwaffe reconnaissance plane, these rubber structures were indistinguishable from the real thing. They even used hand-painted details to simulate the wear and tear of battle, the mud on the skirts, the rust on the barrels. But as clever as the decoys were, they were physically fragile. There is a legendary story from the front lines where 2 French farmers stood frozen in disbelief as they watched 4 American soldiers casually walk over to a 40-ton Sherman tank, pick it up with their bare hands, and rotate it 45 degrees to better align with the shade of a tree. The soldiers looked at the stunned farmers, gave a casual nod, and simply said, "The Americans are very strong." However, a visual decoy is only half the battle. If an enemy scout hears nothing but birds chirping while looking at a tank division, the illusion breaks. This led to the 2nd pillar, the sonic symphony. This was the cutting edge of 1944 technology. The Army Signal Corps had spent months at Fort Knox, recording the sounds of various military operations onto massive, state-of-the-art wire recorders. They recorded the screech of tank treads, the mechanical whir of bridge-building cranes, and the chaotic shouting of men in the mud. These recordings were then brought to the battlefields of Europe and mixed like a terrifying radio play. The Ghost Army used massive 500-pound speakers mounted on the back of half-tracks. These weren't your average loudspeakers. They were powerful enough to project the sound of an army up to 15 miles away. The engineers would play these sounds under the cover of night, convincing German listening posts that a massive armored movement was happening just over the next hill. They would even play sounds of clumsy soldiers to make the illusion feel more human and believable. The final touch was radio spoofing. This was perhaps the most dangerous and technical aspect of the job. Spoof radio operators were trained to mimic the distinct fist of telegraph operators from famous divisions. Every radio operator has a unique rhythm when typing out Morse code, a signature as unique as a fingerprint. The Ghost Army operators studied these signatures so they could impersonate real units. They would send out fake messages about supply shortages, troop movements, and officer transfers, knowing full well that German intelligence was intercepting every single word. It was a digital ghost story told through dots and dashes. But the Ghost Army didn't just rely on props and electronics. They were actors, and the European theater was their stage. When the unit moved into a French town, they would engage in what they called special effects. They would paint the insignias of other famous divisions on their trucks. They would wear different patches on their uniforms to confuse any local spies. They would drive the same two trucks in a continuous loop through a village, disappearing behind a building only to reappear at the entrance of the town, making a handful of vehicles look like an endless, unstoppable convoy. They would even visit local cafes and, accidentally, leave behind fake maps or let slip forged information over a glass of cider, knowing that the friendly bartender might be reporting back to the Wehrmacht by nightfall. They were living a lie every second they were on the front lines, often operating just a few miles, sometimes even hundreds of yards, from the actual German positions. The culmination of their efforts came during Operation Viersen in March 1945. The war was reaching its endgame, and the Allies needed to cross the Rhine River, the final Great Barrier into the heart of Germany. The Ghost Army was given its most critical assignment: pretend to be the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions. They set up a massive stage with 600 inflatable vehicles. They blasted the sounds of heavy machinery and bridge-building equipment throughout the night. They filled the air with fake radio traffic, signaling an imminent, massive river crossing. The deception was so perfect that the Germans moved their entire defensive line, including their heavy artillery and panzer reserves, to face these ghosts. When the real U.S. Ninth Army began their crossing miles away, they found the German defenses almost entirely abandoned. The artists, the set designers, and the radio operators had saved an estimated 10,000 to 30,000 American lives that day without firing a single bullet. They had defeated the enemy with nothing but air and imagination. But perhaps the most incredible part of the Ghost Army story is what happened after the guns fell silent. When the war ended, these 1,100 men didn't get a parade. They didn't get to tell their stories in the local bars. They were sworn to absolute secrecy. The Pentagon realized that the tactics of deception and psychological warfare would be vital during the looming Cold War, so the records of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were classified as top secret. These men went home and returned to their lives as civilians. Many became titans of the creative world. Bill Blass became a world-renowned fashion designer. Ellsworth Kelly became a legendary minimalist painter. Art Kane became a famous photographer. For 50 years, they kept their secret. They didn't tell their wives. They didn't tell their children. Even when they saw movies about the war, they remained silent about the rubber tanks and the 500-pound speakers. It wasn't until 1996 that the files were finally declassified. Only then did the public learn that the liberation of Europe was secured, in part, by a group of art students with air pumps. The lost dispatch of their service was finally delivered to the world. The Ghost Army reminds us that in the chaos of war, the mind is often a more powerful weapon than the machine. They proved that history isn't just made by those who have the most power, but by those who have the most courage to imagine a different reality. In 2022, the surviving members and their families were finally honored with the Congressional Gold Medal. Most of the men were long gone, but their legacy remains, inflated, loud, and brilliantly deceptive. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of World War II, make sure to hit that subscribe button for The Lost Dispatch. We travel through the forgotten files of history to bring you the stories that were never meant to be told. What historical mystery should we decode next? Let us know in the comments. Your intel helps guide our next mission.